Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session in the UDC Library's fall series focusing on modern literacy. Today's session is Fact or Fiction, Truth in the Age of Misinformation. My name is Megan Kowalski. I am the Outreach and Reference Librarian for the UDC Library, and I will be handling logistics for today's event. We will have time for questions, both recorded and unrecorded at the end if you prefer. So go ahead and drop any questions you have in the chat. Today's webinar is being presented by my colleague, Chris Anglum. He is a reference librarian and also the university archivist, and we are very happy to have him here today. So take it away, Chris.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. And welcome. First of all, we'll provide a brief overview. And the traditional model of the marketplace of ideas is that, well, it never worked perfectly. It has worked adequately. It basically involves the basic idea that good information almost always drives out bad information. This was an idea that the founding fathers had conceived of, and it has worked fairly well over our history, not perfectly, but adequately. And so we'll be talking a bit about the ideal and reality of finding truth in information and the rise of the age of information that has challenged the marketplace of ideas like never before because of advanced technology and the power that it puts in the hands of ordinary people. But it also gave rise to misinformation. So we'll be talking about how to protect against misinformation and why it matters. One of the reasons is that misinformation can have some dire consequences. For example, in the vaccine controversy nowadays, science has shown that vaccines save lives, and believing vaccine misinformation and not getting vaccines when needed can lead to serious illness and even death. So very dire consequences can be involved with misinformation. So some misinformation, fact or fiction. We'll be talking about the importance of distinguishing truth from misinformation, how misinformation is generated, and knowing how to effectively navigate the information landscape so that you're gathering the best information that you can and avoiding misinformation. So one of your jobs is to distinguish truth from fiction or falsehoods in your researching process. The primary objective is that we're exploring the challenge of discerning truth from fiction or falsehoods in the contemporary information landscape. We're not talking about a single source or a definitive answer, but we're talking about a critical process by which we can evaluate the spread of purported information in the digital age. So, first of all, how is misinformation generated? Well, how does it come into being? One source is technology, social media, such as the social media algorithms. Social media platforms often amplify emotionally charged or sensational content that often spreads misinformation faster and wider than accurate information. Also, a technological issue is image and data manipulation. This refers to altered images, deepfake technology, and fake news. One example is that digital editing tools can easily be used on images and videos to create false information. For example, some users create realistic videos where people appear to say or do things that they never actually did, creating significant misinformation and absolute falsehood, again, creating images that show people supposedly doing things that they did not actually do. Another example is data manipulation, which can be used in misleading ways to advance a particular agenda, be it political, social, or otherwise. For example, you can make statistics misleading by cherry picking them or using misleading scales. They can be used to distort the meaning of the underlying information that could prove other things. And then besides technology, there's a good old-fashioned human behavior, such as confirmation bias. People tend to believe information that aligns with their existing beliefs and dismiss information that challenges those beliefs. This creates what we call an echo chamber, which makes it more difficult to accept facts that contradict or that seem to contradict a pre-existing worldview. echo chambers arise when individuals are exposed primarily to information that reinforces their existing beliefs. This can worsen social polarization and extremism by limiting critical thinking in the following ways, because listeners are not receiving diverse perspective. Some influencers, these are people who promote a certain type of viewpoint on social media, promote misinformation and present misinformation without the sufficient or accurate context. Some of the consequences are that, and there are many, we'll talk about a few today. One of them is the erosion of trust in public institutions. The constant flood of misinformation can degrade the trust when people are bombarded with misinformation. There's a tendency for their trust in any information, even from legitimate and reputable sources, to be diminished. Democracies need public trust to function well. And so, why is it a problem? Misinformation can hinder effective governance, it can foster division and impair civic engagement. Uh, where a common truth is no longer available, people have their own desperate views, true or not true. So this can lead to these problems, hindrance of effective governance, divisiveness, and problems in uh, effective civic engagement. Unduly they can. It's also a problem because it undermines public confidence by causing misdirected skepticism in the media, government, and public health organizations. Granted, all of these institutions do deserve their share of criticism, but it only should be it only should be skepticism or criticism due to actual problems, where as opposed to unwarranted conspiracy theories and so on. So, in terms of polarization, misinformation is associated with political and social polarization that can lead to that can actually fragment communities where groups are unable to therefore engage in a constructive dialogue or compromise because because of an unwarranted suspicion of each other. So, what are some strategies for navigating the information landscape and detect misinformation, and particularly for uh, uh, for your research purposes? You should you need to confront the effects of misinformation, and you should develop your own research or media literacy skills by doing some of the following. First of all, is to assess the information source. So go beyond the sensational headlines or stories and so on, and determine the veracity of the message being conveyed. Investigate the credentials and affiliations of any authors that you might be reading and publishing organization that is publishing this material, and you can do that easily enough by looking at the About Us section of the page or searching for their history and biographies to determine what their viewpoints are on current issues and what they had published in the past. Then you would need to evaluate their credibility, and you can investigate the source of the information. Reputable news organizations and academic institutions generally have higher standards than some other sources of information, so those would be some of the first ones that you would want to check. Be sure to evaluate the author, check their background and expertise. A recognized expert is more likely to provide reliable information, of course, than those who are not as well known, not as that don't have as strong a background. And then in doing this process, following through this process, you should check your own biases, be aware of your own biases, and critically evaluate whether a source presents a balanced perspective or promotes a specific political or ideological viewpoint. So a reasonably cautious reader should consult diverse sources, diverse uh, types of sources to get a multiple perspective on a subject, engage in critical reading, look at the language and tone of the source for any emotionally charged language or unsupported claims, as these may indicate certain unwarranted bias. So bias is not the same as perspective. Perspective gives you an idea of where the author is coming from, but valid perspective is based on the author's uh, uh, view, study, adequate background and so on. And the fact that he or she is an expert at the field and knows the field very well. So we're not. So there's keep in mind the difference between a valid perspective and unwarranted bias. In checking for bias, again, look for the author's background, affiliations, any funding sources, and previous work, particularly written work. Look if the author has written any peer-reviewed articles or books. Look at these written materials. They may provide some uh, and scrutinize these and look for the scrutiny that is provided by subject matter experts. Peer-reviewed means that these are experts in a field looking at reviewing the articles and so on written by other experts in the field, and this will provide you some good context for whether you want to use this author or not in your work. In investigating the evidence, please do not accept claims at face value, particularly sensational claims or claims in which the evidence looks like it's really very thin. Look for what evidence supports the claim. Is there any? Also, make sure that you know the subject well enough to make sure that you recognize if any essential evidence is being ignored. Is the claim being presented in a balanced manner? In other words, are both sides of an issue given fair treatment? Always consider the context, evaluate the broader context of the claim. Sometimes the data can be misleading or taken out of context, so you need to be aware of that. Also, in investigating the evidence, evaluate how the data was collected, assess what was done appropriately and what was not, scrutinize the author's methodology, identify what methods the author is using and whether the author followed through with that methodology in an appropriate and acceptable way according to your particular discipline. Use reliable databases such as JSTOR, ProQuest, and EBSCOhost. Find out where the data originates from. Look at some of the original studies that are relied on by the author. Um, and that reports data sets rather than simply relying on a secondary interpretation of those original studies. Also, again, if you notice any that an author had omitted using a source that he probably should have used, take note of that as well in your research. Verify statements and stories by using fact checking tools. Consult reliable fact checking sites to verify claims, evaluate statements by public figures, and determine the accuracy of these statements. There is a number of these reliable fact checking tools that are available, such as Snoops, factcheck.org, PolitiFact, Washington Post Fact Checker, and AP Fact Check. These are some of the leading ones that I recommend in terms of verifying statements and stories, making sure that what is presented as fact is indeed fact. For images, be sure to check for digital manipulation, check for deep fakes, doctored images, and be skeptical of highly emotional or visual media that lacks credibility. Verify the authenticity of any images or video before sharing it. You should find the original source images by performing a reverse image search to verify a photo's origin and context. And this is really very easy to do. You can use either Google or TinEye. What you do is to upload the image, paste the URL, and then view the results that you get. So with that, I conclude my interview, my presentation. And so if you need to contact us about further information, use contact ask at udc.libanswers.com, and that will put you in contact with a librarian via the email. Then there's online chat, so you can set up an appointment or visit us in person at the reference desk.
Thank you so
Any,
much, Chris.
thank you.
All right,
Any questions?
give it a minute. I'm not seeing any come in at the moment. All right. I do want to say thank you for attending today, and the recording of today's session will be emailed out sometime this afternoon. I'm now going to stop the recording so we can have time for questions unrecorded.
Thank you.